Okay, so Victoria Electric Vehicle Association, we were contacted by some of our concerned members about recent revelations regarding the inclusion of cobalt in electric vehicle batteries. However, these revelations are not recent, as this issue goes back to the early days of EV uptake in 2014. Regardless, we felt it was time to re-examine cobalt specifically and EV batteries in general. So, cobalt has many uses in modern economies, everything from making durable metals in internal combustion engines, gas turbines, paints, medicines such as vitamin B12, and consumer electronics batteries and EV batteries. It even has a catalyst role in removing sulfur from diesel and gasoline during refining. In certain types of EV batteries, its presence prevents certain chemistries from rapid oxidization, also known as fire. That's in nickel cobalt magnesium and nickel cobalt aluminum batteries. So, cobalt can be found in significant quantities in about 10 countries around the world, producing about 18% of global output. And then the rest of the world picks up the other 12% to come to a total of 30% of global production. But the vast majority, 70%, comes from one country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. It should be noted that almost all of copper's land-based deposits are found in combination with nickel or copper. So it's, in fact, in 2020, only about 14% of global cobalt was not produced as a byproduct of nickel, copper, or platinum group metals production. While 80% of cobalt mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo is done on an industrial scale, about 20% comes from artisanal sources. Artisanal sources are freelance miners working outside of industrial mine sites, sometimes in the centers of villages or raking through old mine tailings to find cobalt ore. A recent book, which has received much press attention, is Cobalt Red. This book echoes similar concerns raised in 2014, and while researched some years ago, it generally echoes the Amnesty International report of 2016. Their report estimated that up to 15% of artisanal miners could be children, working at the surface, washing, cleaning, hauling cobalt ore, and earning somewhere between $1 to $2 a day for their families. Assuming they can work as hard as adult miners means their contribution to the total tonnage could be up to 3.9 thousand tons annually. Impacts of that work can lead to lung ailments, dermatitis, and death for adults in mine collapses, which could number in the hundreds over a decade. In a country where war, disease, and strife have made life difficult at best, these pop-up mines are both hazards as well as income to otherwise destitute families. The DRC government is far from effective in protecting artisanal miners, but has started programs to regulate freelance miners' safety, drop child labor, while recognizing the importance of income to this group. We await further Amnesty International reports on this deplorable situation. So, what I have here, the two tables you see here, you can see are the EV uptake since 2013 compared with cobalt production over the same period. Note that while EV production between 2018 and 2022 increased over 500%, while cobalt production increased only 28%. This is interesting that the two trends are not matched. As seen previously, battery compositions containing cobalt make up 34% of the market between EVs, while battery storage and consumer electronics have 31%. However, the cost of cobalt and the social stigma associated with have led EV manufacturers to seek cobalt-free chemistries, the largest of which are lithium iron phosphate, or LFP, batteries. As of 2022, 31% of EVs produced were without cobalt, with BYD and Tesla being the major leaders in that field. as well as all of them reducing the amount of cobalt used per kilowatt hour of NCM and NCA batteries. This is what has decoupled EV and cobalt production. As a side note, there are 19 million EVs on the planet, plus another 8 million plug-in hybrids running around as of the end of 2022. Going forward, battery recycling companies like Li-Cycle and Redwood Materials are ramping up their efforts with consumer electronics batteries and the early first generation EV batteries, and they're showing a 97% recovery of battery materials. Since the fairly high cobalt content lithium-ion batteries started in the 90s, that means there are 30 years of batteries available to recycle and go into the next generation of low to no cobalt content EV batteries. This will mean that EV demand for new cobalt may disappear altogether. Globally, 2/3 of air pollution is from the extraction, refining, transport, and burning of fossil fuels and vehicles. That results in between 7 and 8 million deaths per year, 10,000 of those in Canada alone. The lingering nature of those deaths and the impacts on our families and healthcare system total $90 billion every year to Canada. Well, a situation about cobalt in 69% of batteries, but dropping, is not good. The road to EV-only transportation leads to the avoidance of much global suffering, which is seemingly accepted with the fossil fuel status quo. Global economies are on the road towards a better future, but there are vast vested interests in the fossil fuel status quo. They will use their money to misrepresent reality and show shades towards better, cleaner, safer replacements for their products. Major cobalt users continue to explore replacements for cobalt in many processes with success. They've had programs to reduce artisanal content in the flow, of which child labor may still be an unacceptable 3%. However, in the context of global harm, this concern must be weighed against the reality that shifting transportation to battery electric vehicles will save millions of lives annually. Regardless, we in the EV world will take fresh trouble for granted and press onward, knowing we work towards a bright future. That's all I got. Any questions?
It is something that people are always asking about, and it is something I think we all care about because, you know, we're trying to improve things on the planet, not make them worse for anybody. So, but I think it's interesting that ultimately, I think cobalt is not going to be needed to be mined very much in the future, unless they come up with some other use for it. So that's
and it is interesting that you know, if you looked at 1990 and see what percentage of cobalt was being used for things, it would have been vastly more towards desulfurization, metals for internal combustion engines, all those things, and batteries wouldn't have been part of it, right?
Yeah.
So that's never mentioned, and it's really interesting. And that I'm sure this author, who, you know, he's done other books on human slavery around the planet, I'm sure he's very, you know, focused on that, as somebody should be. And but I mean, it also seems to be pitched at one part of the, you know, emerging economies rather than the status quo, and that's just not honest.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting. You know, we all know that the internal combustion engine has caused so many health problems for millions of people, and continues to do so. So, you know, there's nobody ever sort of makes a big fuss about that. I mean, I shouldn't say nobody, because there are, you know, people in the health field particularly who are drawing attention to that and actually using that as another argument for cleaner energy.
Yeah.